No, I don't mind. It's okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Miloš. And again, I'd like, first and foremost, thank NSI and its partners in organizing some very timely discussions. And indeed, kind of the title reflects what we have been discussing, and that is the critical points of the normalization process. Just last week, we had a discussion on the question of cultural heritage, but also the implementation of the Constitutional Court judgment on the Dečani monastery property. I think that also came in a very timely format, because I think much of the discussion today in Kosovo, especially, and the recent political developments kind of reflect the tensions within the Brussels facilitated dialogue. I think, and today, again, to say the least, ASM is also one of the more critical aspects of the normalization process, if not the most critical. And I think to date, no agreement has been met with greater controversy and scrutiny than the associations of Serb municipalities. And it has been subject to two specific agreements in Brussels, that of 2013 and 2015. For many, implementation of ASM or talks about implementation have, to some degree, if not to the most degree, been have reflected the sustainability of the integration of the Kosovo Serbs within Kosovo institutions, but have also pointed towards kind of the finalization of a legally binding agreement between Kosovo and Serbia that would also naturally lead, or kind of be a precondition to ASM. And to the large extent, ASM has been seen on the part of Kosovo as a lack of willingness by Kosovo institutions to do what is necessary to kind of finalize the integration of Kosovo Serbs within the public institutions, whereas I think for most Albanians, and the political rhetoric behind the ASM has been viewed as a highly contentious topic that would potentially threaten the sovereignty of Kosovo. I am here joined by three very esteemed panelists today. The plan for today is we will open the floor to our panelists. Each of them will have the chance to discuss for 10 minutes or so on some introductory remarks. Then we will move into an interactive session with the panelists and participants and see whether they have any significant questions or anything that we might want to take note of as we kind of discuss the future on the implementation of ASM. And as I said, prior to passing the floor to the panelists, I think the discussion is very timely, as just last week or in the in the previous month, there's been a lot of talk about what the new government, what the new Kurti government is going to do on the implementation of ASM. And I think public remarks and public rhetoric regarding ASM by the current government has been quite critical, but also has kind of promoted, not necessarily promoted, but has tried to move towards some sort of rebranding of Serb integration within Kosovo that would potentially move outside the confines of what ASM is thought to be in the agreements. Without further ado, I'd first like to pass the floor to Danica. Danica, the floor is yours.
Hi, Ardit. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be part of this discussion. Of course, I said yes immediately after receiving the invitation, because this is the debate that we need. We need to talk about it. And we need to talk about it not just among ourselves, but also with people, and also launch a wide debate on the association, because clearly this is the elephant in the room. And this is clearly going to be causing yet another crisis in the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. Full stop. We cannot say no to that, because this agreement has been going through, it has been signed, it has been going through the parliament, it has been adopted in Kosovo. And as such, Kosovo has legal obligations to either implement it or offer something else that might think it's not the association that potentially puts it to jeopardy the internal functioning of the country, but at least to offer a solution on how do we get out of this crisis, out of this situation. I was with Jovana in Paris last year. We specifically discussed about this, about how little we discuss about it. In Kosovo, the debate is a no, a big red line. This is the line that actually we cannot cross. If you talk to people in Kosovo, the association is perceived as the end of discussion, meaning that if the association is implemented as such, it has to come with a recognition. So for us in Kosovo, this is the ending point. This is where the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia ends. And then for Serbia, but also non-recognizers, is a starting point, because it's, an agreement that has been signed in 2013 that has to be implemented because, as part of the agreement is a huge part of the agreement. I mean, I'm certainly aware that not all elements of the Brussels agreement have been implemented properly, but most of the elements have either started being implemented or are in the process. Some have been concluded. So as such, for Serbia, this is a starting point, meaning that we need to fulfill what we signed in 2013. And then this would, this new situation created after Pristina fulfills its promises or implements the agreement signed, of course, in 2013, would pave the way for the final agreement. And none of this has been confirmed by the member states. But these are the two scenarios, and this is the why we cannot find common ground on this issue. Of course, the debate in Kosovo is that Kurti did not sign the agreement. Kurti did not support the agreement. We had political crisis, tear gas in the parliament. It's specifically because this agreement wasn't supported by Vetëvendosje. Yet again, when Kurti ran for the elections twice, in the past years, he knew that the agreement on association exists. So, and he was aware, and his party, that this is going to be the first issue that they will have to deal with in the dialogue. So my expectations were that at least there is a plan on how to navigate from here. There is a plan on what to do with the association, how to at least start the debate on writing the status of the association. I mean, there are clearly two different approaches towards it. There is, of course, the Kosovo attitude, which tries to simplify the association in the form of an NGO, which is a bit weird because governments cannot form NGOs. Well, they can in our countries, but that's not a good thing. There are gongos. So is it going to be similarly to what already we have on the Albanian Association, which, is an association of municipalities, which basically gathers mayors of different municipalities discussing issues and of importance to them. And this was very active, at least during the COVID-19 pandemic when they were dealing with emergencies. Or is it something that, is foreseen by the Serbian side, which is definitely more than an NGO? And but we don't know the final form of it because we never discussed it. So that's why I do consider it very important for us to open the discussion, the debate among us, with people, with the government, and see how do we design something that would potentially improve the lives of the Serbian community in Kosovo, because we never know if that's going to be the case. Unfortunately, as you already know, we signed a lot of deals in the framework of the Brussels agreement dialogue, and not necessarily these agreements have been beneficial for the Serbian community in the north. I always take the case of the Serbian list, which has been quite problematic in how basically that list monopolized the political representation of the Serbian community in Kosovo. If you look at it from the positive perspective, of course, it ensured participation of the local Serbs in the institutions. But the negative part of it, the negative side of it is the fact that, that representation is not necessarily something that we would want to see. So there are always the risks, but in order to mitigate this risk, we have to talk, to discuss and see what we can design, which can be beneficial for both sides and overcome the current crisis in the dialogue. So this is my initial intervention, and I'm very open to questions. I hope I didn't take a lot of time.
Thank you very much, Danica. I plan to get back to a lot of what you said after, especially on plans on how to navigate the dialogue with the current government. I was just also told that Shpëtim will be sadly leaving us at 3:30. The floor is yours, Shpëtim, now, and then we will be followed by Miodrag afterwards.
Thank you, Ardit. And you know, a lot of it has been said about the association or Zajednica. So not much left new, but I'll just go quickly back to when it was formed and why this was formed. That, you know, how come that did not come out of nowhere. I remember when from 2010 to 13 they were negotiating in Brussels, mostly the integration of the Serb community into Kosovo's institutions, and then they found some ways for the integration of judiciary, police, civilna zaštita. But there were a few things that were left. It was education, healthcare, and some other Serbian institutions that are still in Kosovo. And the association was seen as a mechanism to integrate education, healthcare. And there are about 12,000 people working in these institutions. So basically the Serbian government has 12,000 employees in Kosovo, and they work for Serbia's Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, and then pension fund. So the association actually was seen as a mechanism to integrate these institutions into some kind of Serb-controlled Kosovo system. Because now we talk about the association as kind of an end in itself, but no, it was a means for some other end. And I think on the Kosovo side, the debate, which is been manipulated a lot, and it's either association or no association. It's a false choice. The choice is either association or Serbian institutions in Kosovo. If anyone believes that the educations that Serbs have now will integrate into Kosovo's Ministry of Education, they have absolutely no clue about Kosovo's politics. And if we go back to the 90s, we Albanians had exactly these two pillars, education, healthcare, on which our then parallel state stood on, and then we felt that we are independent. So it was education and healthcare. All the rest, we respect the Serbian institution, the police, ID card, passports. We only had education, healthcare, and we're saying we have a state. And then another risk why Serbs should not integrate into the Ministry of Education, for instance, is the curriculum. Now, if they integrate the ministry, I can see Kosovo's minister intervening and maybe banning some books which will say that Kosovo is part of Serbia and will continue to say until there is a recognition. So Kosovars should basically say, okay, we don't want an association, but we agree with the continuation of the Serbian institutions in Kosovo. And if they want to go with that, then maybe they just should legalize or regulate somehow these institutions, recognize the diplomas. But the choice that it's either association or nothing, it's really false, and this is manipulating the debate. And as Donika said and others, there hasn't been much. There's been a lot of unhealthy debate, which is restrict like 5 words, Zajednica kalon or nu kalon, but there hasn't been a lot of substantive debate. And then I think that also why the association, I mean, the Serb integration into Kosovo institution without something is seen as subordination, and I think that's not gonna pass. Serbs know that they will remain an inevitable permanent minority in the central institutions. This double majority of this, the Albanians will always find a way to bypass it, like they did with the army. They couldn't change the constitution; they changed the law, and the Serbs couldn't stop it. So it's the Serb power on this veto 2/3. I think it's a little bit exaggerated, and Serbs know it. So that's why the Serbs are not, with this association, are not asking to raise their status in the hierarchy of Kosovo central institutions, but because they know will always be outvoted, but in a way they want this kind of autonomous institution in areas where they constitute the majority. And I think that's why it's really not a threat to Kosovo. But the problem is that the Serb community in Kosovo doesn't have an independent kind of political elite that could negotiate on behalf of the community. And that's where the problem comes in Kosovo. It's because Belgrade is demanding this association. I remember Mr. Kurti in a Chatham House meeting 5-6 years ago, but I guess doesn't matter anymore. He was in opposition then. He said we don't have the problem with the demand, which was association. He said we have a problem with those that demand the association. And I'm quoting him now, paraphrasing. He said that if this demand would come from the Serbs in Kosovo, we would absolutely talk. We might even agree to give even more to them. But as long as it's coming from Belgrade, this is not about, and you know, they're not convinced that this is about right. They say Belgrade has some ulterior motives, which could lead to partition or something. So more or less, you know, these are my comments, and I look forward to hearing some other speakers here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Betim. I hope we will find enough time to also engage in a discussion, because I think some of the points you brought up are very relevant and should be discussed in light of what is going on right now, but also Kurti's current narrative around the ASM. I would now pass the floor to Miodrag. Miodrag, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I mean, it's very difficult now to speak after Spetim. It looked like he stole my notes, basically saying all the same things. But I will try. It is indeed the topic that a lot has been said, but nothing has been done. And I can admit that actually I'm boring myself repeating the same old things after so many years. But I'm forced, because the things are not changing. Not only that they are not changing, but I think with the whole idea we're going backward, especially in Kosovo society, where we came from the 2030 when the agreement was signed. We came today to the general stigmatization of the concept of the association of Serbian municipality. More precisely, stigmatization of the concept that Kosovo Serbs can have the framework for the self-governance in certain areas. And this is the arguments about the Kosovo I will speak later. So the positions are very well known. Belgrade asked for regional executive authorities of the association. Pristina does not allow that. We know the arguments, we know the motive, but I will try to, maybe for the sake of the discussion, point out to one new thing, one new element that actually brought, that placed the Association of Serbian Municipality into the light recently. And that new thing actually has its own origin in a Trump administration overturn, at the point when the Brussels agreement dialogue was revitalized as a primary process, revived as a primary process that's supposed to result with a comprehensive agreement. This new role of the United States that was primarily focused on revival of the allies with the EU actually left EU the leading role in the whole process, and the whole Brussels dialogue is reset at that point. At that point, there are two things that became very clear. First one is that the prospect of the insofar format, we only facilitate, I must apologize, the two things became clear. First, the prospect of the format of EU, we only facilitate waiting Pristina and Belgrade to come to agreement, is not going to result with any productive agreement. That was the first realization. The second one is, if there is going to be a productive agreement, there will be a kind of enforced solution. I'm saying enforced with a reserve, certain reserve, because I'm not talking about the pressure. I'm talking about the authorship, where the solution will come from. And such an enforced solution is possible only with a very, very strong partnership between the United States and the European Union, and it's based on the perceptions of the compromise of those Western powers that have primary interest in Kosovo, and that's EU. And so now I'm coming to the very element, what's new about it. And the new thing is that Association of Serbian Community has become a compromise, the main point of the compromise in the eyes of the United States and the European Union. So European Union and United States are working on forming the offer for Serbia that would envisage establishment of a functional Association of Serbian Municipality. After that, Belgrade would be forced to sign the agreement with Kosovo at the level of two equal parties, which will mean informal recognize the status equality between the contractual parties. And then that would establish a precedent that would allow the further advancement of Kosovo toward the EU, even so recognition of 5 non-recognized in EU. So this is my analysis with all these limits and all these reserves, saying that this is exactly the current plan that EU is working on. Of course, this is not a publicly statement, nor it will be, but narratives that are being nourished by the United States and European Union, especially in the last couple of months, are actually leading to that conclusion. You saw that there is a unanimous voice from European Union asking Pristina, pressuring Pristina to form association in any opportunities. The same requests come from the United States. What's the problem with that plan? There are 2 problems. First one is that Belgrade is not accepting this plan, and the second problem is that Pristina is not accepting the plan. For Belgrade, association is not a concession that is sufficient to recognize, and there are quite a few reasons for that. First of all, there is the public relation capacity of such a concession has been already utilized in 2013 when there was an agreement signed. At that time, Serbian media were full with stories celebrating the huge victory. So this is the concept that has been already utilized and expand. Second of all, the autocratic regime of governance in Serbia has been seriously shaken in the last year or 2, with rising dissatisfaction of the citizens. So with the autocratic rule, so any kind of agreement at this point would result with the riots on the street and mobilization on even those parts of the society that has been aside insofar. And for the end, Belgrade needs solution that this solution will survive at the elections. The solution that can be called a victory, regardless of what after that there will be a recognition. And for the Belgrade, those are only 2 solutions. One is the membership in EU by the model of Bulgaria and Romania, which means not necessarily internal reforms, which is not possible after the Brexit and crisis in EU. And second solution is the alienation, partition of Kosovo, so-called partition of Kosovo based on ethnic lines, which is a currently rejected plan. So there is no third scenarios. In a way, pressure of Belgrade for the formation of association of Serbian municipalities is a form of tactical maneuver that is used to pressure the Pristina, knowing that Pristina will never recognize, in which will then affect the legitimacy of Brussels dialogue as a process, and then open the space to revisit the idea on partition. The idea of partition and idea of association of municipalities are not complementary, which to me tells that Belgrade is not substantially interested to form association of Serbian municipalities. So this would be my kind of introductory remarks on this topic.
Thank you, Miodrag. I think also very relevant remarks and something that will stimulate additional discussion. I will open the floor in a bit. However, prior to that, I have an additional question that I want to pose to the panelists, and also kind of seek some additional remarks prior to opening the floor for questions by the other participants. I'm specifically interested in just recently, I mean, here in Kosovo, we've been seeing, I think Kurti had one of the first kind of public discussions on issues relating to the dialogue a couple of days ago in a local news outlet. And among others was discussion on ASM. And Kurti strongly kind of, again, as always, has strongly condemned the formation of ASM in Kosovo. However, he noted of something in terms of potentially rebranding what ASM means for Kosovo, and that relates to what he proposed to Vučić in their second meeting in Brussels, which was a four-point plan. Among them was something on reciprocity on minority rights. And the point said that once mutual recognition is finalized, Kosovo will move to create a national council on Serb minorities, similar to what Serbia currently has on Albanian minorities. And to some, this seems like a sort of rebranding of ASM in the eyes of Kurti and potential for the future. So I just want to bring this out for discussion to our panelists, just remarks on what they think about this and what is the potential that Kurti can rebrand ASM in Kosovo. Shpetem?
Just because I have to go, so just one word sentence on that. That principle of conditioning your citizens' rights with the rights of the citizens of another country is wrong. If a prime minister of Kosovo says that the rights of my Rahovec people will be the same as the people of Shkodër in Albania, I would not want to be in that country. That would not be my country. I would want to leave as fast as I can. So this is wrong. Conditioning, comparing the rights of your own citizens, it does not happen in a democratic country. Biden does not say Mexico will give the Mexicans the same rights as you give to the Americans. And it's just, the principle is wrong. It comes from some 19th century, I don't know, I won't use the word with kind of regimes, but yeah, it's just wrong.
Thank you, Shpetim. Donika or Miodrag?
Donika, if you want.
Yeah, I mean, minority rights are something that we should all deal with in the Western Balkans, and there are specific processes through which, you know, at least the EU tries to regulate this. And of course, in some countries is the integration process, and in our case, it has gone through the independence, of course, the Ahtisaari package, and now the Brussels dialogue. So, I don't think we can do rebranding like that. I mean, this strategy can be something else, can be buying time, can be, you name it. I mean, you can come up with different principles, different objectives, and this way you can buy time, but the elephant is still in the room and you have to address it. And this is the association. So before coming up with proposals, which can be like, not really deconstructed properly, I think the internal debate is important because we can shape it the way we want to shape it. We don't have to call it Republika Srpska without being it Republika Srpska, because there are different circumstances. Now, in Bosnia, we talked about ceasefire. People were killing each other when the agreement was, you know, assigned, and also the geography, the percentage, and then of Serbs in Bosnia was different. And here we are talking about 20 years after the war. We are talking about a rather peaceful environment. Unfortunately, it's not fully peaceful environment, and we are talking about, you know, like negotiations which is taking place in Brussels. So there is plenty of room for it to be shaped. I mean, I agree with Miodrag. Maybe we can do it through EU and US pressure, but maybe it's about the time for us to actually sit and do it together. Maybe this way it can definitely, we can create something that fits us all. But the thing is that, are we ready for that? I mean, if you look at the current situation on the ground, but also the leverage that of the EU over Vučić, then, you know, it's not so promising. In case of Kosovo, we can always condition the dialogue with the international functioning of international representation and acceptance of Kosovo. You can link it to 5 no-recognizers. You can link it to UN membership or whatever. But in Serbia, where is the leverage? I mean, if the EU conditionality, I mean, the EU enlargement process is not working, the EU cannot deliver definitely as or offer membership to Serbia the way it did to Romania and Bulgaria, because they still, you know, think that that's a big mistake, and it was. Then what is there, you know, to basically to serve as an incentive for Vučić to commit in the dialogue? So I have to agree with Miodrag. This is happening because I mean, Vučić doesn't want the association, because that means that we would unblock the EU, the dialogue, and clearly he is not ready to sign anything, not before the elections, not after the elections, not until Serbia becomes a new member, or like on what is like at least like literally 2 days before entering the EU, and this way the association serves him as a good tool to blame on Pristina, because if you look at the narrative and how is it built, is that Kurti is not constructive. But how do you measure constructiveness? Do you measure it by the parties' willingness to go and negotiate in Brussels, parties' willingness to actually push the process forward, or parties' willingness to just throw the ball in each other's court and play play the blame game? For Vučić, the association is a perfect tool to blame the Kosovo party for not delivering, and by doing so, he will keep this tool in his hand because it's in his benefit. So my biggest fear is that even with the alignment of EU, US, and now UK, it's not going to be easy to have an agreement or to move on in the process because of authoritarian tendencies, democratic backsliding, the lack of EU enlargement agenda in the Balkans. I mean, we can have as many strategies even by France now, which is kind of in a way being more proactive in the EU enlargement process, but we know that it is not there and it's not going to happen with all the crises within the EU, with all the issues that the EU has. So my fear is that the international community does not have any incentive, and internally our political elites do not really want to move this process forward, and that's clearly for their own benefits.
Thank you, Donika. Miodrag?
Okay, I agree with most of the things said before me with respect to Donika. I just want to have one clarification about Donika made a reference on my remarks about the Vučić doesn't want EU, doesn't want association. Vučić wants association, of course, because it cannot harm, but he doesn't want it as a deal to recognize, as the only concession to recognize. He wants more. So just the short clarification. The question was about the rebranding and the idea of Kurti, the 4-point plans. Rebranding might be necessary because the notion of association of Serbian municipality has been polluted in a Kosovo society to the extent that it's not possible. But the rebranding of the idea should not interfere with the, from the Serbian perspective, should not interfere with the intended executive powers of the association, but rather with the name of the association, maybe some rather statutory, less significant statutory elements of it. If the rebranding means that some of the prerogatives that were intentionally agreed 2013 are removed from it, the Serbian government in Belgrade, the Kosovo Serb and Kosovo communities will not find it acceptable. And this is probably one of the rare points when there is this harmonization of the position, although it seems rather different. What Kurti is doing, he is doing the same thing as Vučić when he's insisting on association. He's offering solution, knowing that the other side is not going to accept it. And I agree with Donika. This kind of just illusion of the constructiveness from both leaders are actually undercover means how to how to reject the whole movement and the whole process of Brussels dialogue that is now based around the situation of Serbian municipalities. And if you allow, one last point is what Špetin was referring rightfully about reciprocity logic when the conditions when some of the rights of the communities in Kosovo, sub-community in Kosovo, are subjected to the reciprocity of the rights of Albanian communities in Serbia. Trust me, I don't have any problems with the Albanian community in Serbia to live very respectful lives, dignified lives with all the rights, but this is not the same. We are not talking about the same thing. We are talking about Serbian community that in 1999, from being in its own country, all of a sudden find themselves in another country, said by the majority of the people, which was not even the friendly. And in such a situation, the whole package Ahtisaari proposal, which is actually a foundation for the idea of associations municipalities, was offered as a concession for the Kosovo Serbs and actually as a mean for them to control their own life. So I was just actually supporting what Špetin was saying, that we cannot base the arguments on the reciprocity in this case.
Thank you, Miodrag. I think Dusan has raised his hand. Dusan.
Thank you, Ardit, and thanks to all the panelists and to all the attendees and participants that are following us. I know we have around 100 participants just on the Zoom call and probably much more on the Facebook Live. I just wanted to comment about the thing you mentioned about Curtis' proposal for the national minority councils that we have in Serbia. For the purpose of this discussion, it's important to just to clarify what we have. So Serbia has a law on national minority councils, which is by many estimations assessments one of the best laws in that area in Europe. And I know because I've worked with a lot of experts in this field, and this is something that is really far, far away from the idea of the association of Serb municipalities, because the national minority councils are more like the purpose is for the preservation of the cultural identity of the minorities. So it has some connections with the education and etc. But the association of Serb municipalities, the idea is more about the governance. The idea is about the joining of the municipalities, which are the bodies of the local self-government. So it's much more about the governance, and national minority councils are much more about cultural identity and the preservation of the minority identity in Serbia. So I just wanted to add this. So that's why this Curtis proposal is very interesting, because I'm sure that he knows very well the differences and how far are those two phenomena, those two concepts. And thank you. Yeah, Ardit.
Thank you, Dusan, very much.
If I may, just
Yes,
shortly,
Danica.
when we do this internal debate, which is very important, I also want not just with the government, but also among ourselves. And this is something specifically important for the local Serb. Is the association really going to improve the lives of the Serbian community in Kosovo? So this is the question that we should all ask to ourselves. Yes, because I mean, this is just, because we discussed this also, it's also in Paris with Jovana. This is very important because, as Shpeti mentioned, there is this double majority, but then there is always a way to bypass it. There are disagreements, but there always are gaps. And there is as I mentioned with the Serbian list, and I mean, things did not go as they were envisaged initially. Will this really be a solution? Or this is just one step? So, or how do the local Serbs envisage the association? So that's why it's important to have this debate, and I was really hoping that Kuti would do that. Because as I mentioned in my initial intervention, he knew that the agreement exists and that has to be addressed as an issue, either implemented or, as Isa Mustafa, the person who signed it, said, to just annul it. Why not? If you have the majority in the parliament and you don't want to deal with it, then why don't you just go back to just abolishing the entire agreement? So that's the thing that we all expected, is that the internal dialogue with the local Serbs would take place, and if that would take place, at least the inputs from the local Serbs would have been integrated in what the government would do with the association as such, and then of course discuss it with us here. But then this dialogue between civil society and the government did not really take place, apart from a few meetings that we had organized by BPRG. And then I don't know if something is happening between the government and the local Serbs, or if this is happening, is it going through NGOs or through the political representatives, or how is this, being developed in among the local Serbs?
Thank you, Danica. Miodrag, you can have the floor now, but could you also just comment briefly on the issue of internal dialogue brought up by Danica? How do you view the issue of the internal dialogue and prospects for the current government to kind of implement some sort of internal dialogue with Kosovo Serbs? Because Kurti actually says that Kosovo Serbs themselves do not want the association of Serb municipalities, but I think he doesn't recognize why they don't want it. And could you please also highlight a bit on that?
Yeah, okay. I mean, what Kurti said that Serbs doesn't want it, this is actually a reflection of the problem that was mentioned here earlier, that there is a gap between the genuine interest of the Kosovo Serb community and what has been presented by its political leaders as the interests of the Kosovo Serbs, because the Kosovo Serb political leadership is actually loyal to the interest of the party in Belgrade, not to the people itself. I mean, it became obvious in 2018 when I would say 6 mayors of the municipalities in the south endorsed the idea of partition, knowing that they will lose a lot, and their neighbors, their relatives, their family will lose a lot. I mean, at that point, any illusion that Srpska lista is generally represented the interest of Kosovo Serbs has been dispersed. So I know that Veteran Dossier is from the very beginning insisting on the dialogue with the genuine representatives of the Kosovo Serbs. But at the time being, the genuine representatives of the Kosovo Serbs are Srpska lista, regardless of democratic practices in the enrollment. And I think this is where this perception is coming that Serbs does not want association, because this is linked to the idea of partition of Kosovo that was endorsed by Srpska lista in 2018. And I already said that partition of Kosovo and association of municipalities are two incompatible plans. So this is, I believe, the answer to your question. But there was this, Donika mentioned one quite important issue is the lives of the Kosovo Serbs is going to be better after association is going to be formed. And this is something that deserves actually a bit of attention to it. I mean, expectations of the Kosovo Serbs from the association are huge. I would say even unrealistic, because there is this impression that association will resolve all the problems that Kosovo community is facing, and of course it won't. Even after association of Kosovo Serbs, even after association is formed, Kosovo Serbs are going to live in the same apartment, same problems. They will live in the same legal system, etc., etc. Association may create the capacity that the interests of their community are defended in a united way, in a united manner, or create administrative framework to preserve so-called soft parallel institutions, something that Spetin was saying. For everything else, the Serbian community will have to fight by themselves. Even if one day association is formed, we will have to make sure that this body, this entity is actually in the function of the community, that there is a citizen control, that there is no, that we actually eradicate corruption. Otherwise, the Kosovo Serb community will have very few benefits out of the association of Serbian communities.
Thank you very much, Miodrag. I think we are now joined by Milica from NSI as well. I think Milica has a question for the panelists, but also some comments on what has been discussed, seeing as she has been extensively involved in discussions on ASM. Milica?
Hi, everyone. Yes, it's more comments on things that were said. I first want to congratulate everyone for quite a level-headed discussion, a very argumented and normal discussion, which kind of makes me wonder why they cannot agree on anything when things seem to be rational and normal when other people talk about it. First, I wanted to address something that Spetin said. I mean, not his comment, but he referred to Kurti's recent statement that the ASM is a problem for him because it did not come from Kosovo Serbs. This is a very clear explainer or proof to me to what extent Kurti does not understand the Serbian Kosovo Serb community. When it comes to Kosovo Serb community, a request to willingly integrate to Kosovo institutions, this will never come spontaneously. The integration process so far, the judiciary, the police, the security forces, that was all forced by Serbia. So even this will also mean that the healthcare system and education system will need to be forced processes done in coordination with Serbia. And of course, Serbia's request for integration is the ASM. So it is not a Kosovo Serb request, because Kosovo Serb would want much more, which is to stay with the institutions that they know. And I think this is, Špetim explained this very well. So this is not a choice between, yes, we will have an ASM or we will have an ASM with no competencies. This is a choice between the remainder of the Serbian system in Kosovo or a Kosovo institution that will replace this system. And I think that this is not communicated well in Kosovo. And the fact that Kurti doesn't even understand that this will never come as a request by Kosovo Serb community is very worrying. So just we are pointing out this, when I say we, I mean civil society. The 2013 integration process was forceful. People were physically made to go to election polls to establish Kosovo municipalities. There were since then criminal structures were organized to control this process. So again, this is not a bottom-up approach. This is not an honest request by Kosovo Serbs. This is a greater political game, and Kurti is either going to play it or not, but that's his. I guess that's his right to choose this strategy. The other thing that I wanted to address, yes, these national national minority councils. We already had this idea of reciprocity back in 2015. Serbia forbade the import of books in Albanian language from Kosovo to Buenovac, Preševo, and Medveđa because they had Kosovo's coat of arms. As a response to this action, Kosovo Customs also forbade the import of books, especially books in Cyrillic, but also textbooks, Serbian textbooks to Kosovo. Since then, Serbia and Albania, or Ministry of Education of Albania, managed to resolve to some extent the problem for Preševo, Buenovac, and Medveđa. So books for some of the subjects, not all, are coming into Serbia from Albania, but we, as Kosovo Serbs, have remained with our part of reciprocity measure back then introduced by Kosovo, and we are still smuggling in books. We are, our schools are smuggling books, our bookstores are smuggling books, and our post offices will not take on books for shipments because there is still this ban that everyone seemed to have forgotten. So we already had this idea of reciprocity, and in practice it ended up creating a huge problem for Kosovo Serbs. As a part of a very small group, I could absolutely understand the need of people in Preševo, Buenovac, and Medveđa to have a greater authority standing behind them and trying to fill out for any needs or capacity, lack of capacity that they might have as a community. The smaller community, of course, the smaller the capacities. So I fully understand that, but again, this has to be understood for Kosovo Serbs as well. They will always rely on Belgrade or some institution that they at least perceive as more competent to help them out in requesting their rights. But for Albanians in Preševo, Buenovac, and Medveđa, given the current relations between Kosovo and Serbia, I think the best bet for them would be to turn to Albania for these things, to try and help them out if there are any things that are not functioning well, especially now in the context of the Open Balkan and, let's say, new era of relations between Serbia and Albania. So I wouldn't really have anything against it. I completely understand that need. I just don't think that for Kosovo, this is a fair ask. This should be, there would be greater chances for Albanians in Serbia to insist on some of the things that they have the right to through Albanian institutions. That's for, and yes, so again, also Donika asked, she didn't ask, she said that there should be a discussion on whether the ASM will improve the life of the Kosovo Serb community. Again, that will depend with the ties to Belgrade. Again, to say, we are a small community. If we are giving, let's say, this institution that would govern both healthcare and education, Of course, the capacities will not be as great as they would be in Serbia, which is a country of 7 million. So if this body would be allowed to have good connections with the Serbian government, then that would be fine. If we were left to fend on our own, I am really afraid that there will be areas in which management will not be sufficiently efficient because, again, we are 100,000 people at best, and probably even less, maybe 95,000 people, Kosovo Serbs that live in Kosovo. It is not realistic to expect that there are great human capacities to be found in that small body of people. That's for my comments, and thank you for letting me join in.
Thank you, Milica, very much. I mean, I have a bunch of additional questions. However, I'd first like to open the floor to all the other participants, and whoever has any questions, the floor is now open, and I encourage you all to ask any questions unfiltered as they may seem, because I think the discussion we are having today is very much needed. And I think it's, as Donika said, it's essential that we try and kind of extend the scope of this discussions outside of what has been facilitated by some traditional actors in Kosovo.
If I may, in the meantime, while we wait for the questions from the audience, can I?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Always refreshing to talk to Milica, and it's always good to have these events organized. And you know, like with Milica, I even talk privately when there is something going on, because it is unbelievably weird how little we know about the actual problems. Because I mean, the issue is politicized, and Milica is right. It's a greater political game. So it was always a top-down approach, and it was always a lead-driven process. Unfortunately, this is the case. We have been demanding constantly to be included in the process. But I mean, in Serbia, there was some, round of internal dialogue in Kosovo that never took place. We tried through civil society mechanisms to have some sort of impact in the process. It started last year during the Hoti government. We even tried to create a coalition of civil society organizations to try to, see if we can help the government at least to disentangle some of the issues, but it didn't work well, to be honest. I mean, we had a few meetings, and then after Hoti went down, then Kurti came with a completely different approach towards civil society. There is this team of advisory, a team that is helping Kurti in the process of the dialogue, but that still is not representative. So it's not that it's a bottom-up approach. It is still the way it used to be. Because it's a top-down, we fail to see the actual problems on the ground. And then that's why when we talk about the association, we just talk about executive powers, and we talk about Republika Srpska, we talk about issues that are heavy political, but and rather not focus on specific issues that are of interest of local Serbs. And it's really sad, because Milica is right. Being forced to be integrated, and then having the debate over the potential partition or exchange of territories, and then again, closing that chapter and talking about integration, it's tiring. It sends all kinds of wrong messages. And even among the EU, when we talk to some member states, or even to EU Brussels External Action Service back in the days with Mogherini, which implicitly in a way supported the idea, it's like, what the hell are you doing? What kind of messages are you sending to people? We totally understand the frustration. As for the executive powers, I mean, we talk about executive powers as if, is the end of the world, but municipalities have executive powers. I have executive powers as the director of Civicos. So if you regulate it properly, then the executive powers are not really, like something to be scared of. There are decisions taken for the citizens living in those municipalities. So that's why we need this discussion. For the way it has been framed in Kosovo, for instance, by the people who actually signed the agreement, Isa Mustafa and of course former President Taci, is that they supported the idea initially of the association, and then later on, the same people actually came up with it's either the association, which is bad, and then there is territorial exchange, or status quo. So you have to choose between these options. So basically, people who actually supported it, then regretted it, and then sold it as a bad option. So that's why there is the lack of trust. If you talk about the association in Kosovo, you immediately see it as a mechanism of wishes to control internally, Kosovo. That's it. So we don't see it as, something that will benefit the citizens, but something that is a political tool to actually make the country dysfunctional. So that's why we have to debunk this. We have to talk about this, and then we should find a way, probably for as Melissa said, the process not to be controlled by Belgrade. But then, how do we do this? And this is something that is. I don't have the answer, and nobody does, unfortunately.
Thank you, Danica. I don't think there are any questions as of now, but I have an additional question, and maybe pointing towards Miodrag, but also what Danica just said. I mean, Kurti has signaled some sort of internal dialogue. However, he has by definition shot himself in the foot when he said, I will not talk to Srpska lista about Kosovo Serb issues because there are not legitimate representatives of the Kosovo Serb electorate. And now asking Miodrag specifically, how could the government approach some sort of internal dialogue, but also on kind of not necessarily rebranding, but shifting the discussion on ASM from something that will threaten sovereignty of Kosovo to how do we integrate Serbs and get rid of the existing parallel institutions? What are the prospects of this internal dialogue as we see it right now?
Well, I mean, if the internal dialogue is going to include the Srpska lista as officially elected representatives of Kosovo community on the election organized under the Constitution of Kosovo, then I don't think that this dialogue has a lot of has a future, a fruitful future. Actually, it's not because nobody else to speak with, is because then there is a question of legitimacy of the interlocutors in that case. I mean, he can talk with civil society organization on the end. We can offer, like we are doing now, we can offer our views, but the question is based on which act are we nominating ourselves as representatives of the Kosovo Serb community? This is probably a registration act of the NGO's registration certificate. This is the only act. The Kosovo political Srpska lista are elected officials, and I know because we also are kind of facing lack of credibility in sense of preservation of genuine interest. But at the time being, they are the only interlocutors that has a political credibility to discuss in this case. And the problem is not going to be resolved by picking other interlocutors in the Kosovo community, because the problem is deeper. The problem is the lack of the pluralism of the Kosovo Serb political scene. And in that area, there are many other issues that are actually going against and even the basic standards of democratic governance in that sense. So in the end, I don't think that approach of the Kosovo, it is of the Kurti and the Vetfen dossier to basically initiate the dialogue that will result with some concrete agreements is futile at all. He can hear, but this dialogue, if it happened, I support it fully, because in that case, I believe the Kosovo government can learn about the differences and the nuances of the interests of the Kosovo Serbs, and they exist, whether on interest of the Serbs south of River Ibar or north one, but also political views and genuine interest of the Kosovo Serbs that are very plural in their case, but because of the uniform political leadership cannot surface.
Thank you, Miodrag. Again, I see no questions, but I have another question, and potentially the last question for our panelists. And again, I would go back to Danica as well. I think she has rightfully pointed out that even government-sponsored attempts to kind of talk about the dialogue have been futile, and especially the current external expert team. I think there's been no discussion whatsoever what exactly they've been doing, but I remember from my time at the government as well, there are position papers on specific issues related to the dialogue, which are not public at all or are not discussed at all. Again, my question here is, in terms of future trajectories, especially related to ASM, Shpatim rightfully pointed out that the question of ASM should be association versus continuation of current parallel institutions. And as of late, I heard Bisnik Bislimi said that there would be no dialogue given the continuation of parallel structures in Kosovo. As it seems, there seems to be a status quo on the discussion as well. There's no helping hand on either side in terms of discussing the dialogue. So again, the question both for Miodrag and Donika is how can we advise the government on what would be the best kind of the best approach towards broadening, widening discussions on ASM, potentially moving away from threats to sovereignty into one of what Shpatim said as association, integration of Serbs versus continuation of parallel structures for God knows how many more years.
Being track two. I mean, being track two, this is what we do. What we can do is initiate the debate altogether on how the association should look like, to debunk the myths around association, to see if we can help at least change the narrative around it, if that's possible. But even if you try to do the minimum effort in this regard, you immediately get either, like targeted attack, and of course you become part of this, like a very, very, let's say, still lively debate on, it's not a debate, it's just a clear rejection on the idea in general. So what I believe we can do as a first step is that we might not have a direct impact on what's happening in Brussels, but what we can do is do the track two, which is dead. And it's unfortunate, and this is what I also mentioned in Paris, that I talk more often to my colleagues in Belgrade from civil society than cooperate internally with local organizations from the Serbian community, especially in the north. I mean, this is not predominantly my case, because with Jovana's projects we have been engaged in many debates, but this is how the situation is at the moment. So I think we should talk to each other, organize each other, and see if we can do joint debates on how do we overcome this situation and try to change the narrative. This is the first step. The second step is that, I mean, what I can do is just advise Kurti not to say no without offering the option, the alternative, and not by trying to rebrand the association, but by trying to work with what's in the agreement and try to engage actively internally in Kosovo with the opposition as well, because what is Kurti's problem at the moment is the fact that he has to deal with the opposition that actually signed the agreement, and now they are completely against it.
Exactly.
So it's like extremely worrying to see how they changed when they became opposition. They changed completely. Now they're using that tool against Kurti politically, internally, which is not healthy at all. So we need to do that. Well, lista srpska is lista srpska. I mean, it's whether they are legitimate or not, we cannot decide, because they got the vote and they are in the parliament. So we have to extend cooperation in that regard and see if we can do something. I recall during the first intervention in the north, Lista Srpska was playing in a way a constructive role in trying to negotiate between the police and the local Serbs. So maybe, I mean, they are the legitimate representatives of the local Serbs. This is the situation, whether, they represent the local population or Belgrade, that's another debate, but we really need to find a way how to engage with local Serbs, maybe through NGOs, but I do understand that the situation is very, very problematic. And also here, like with Albanian NGOs, I've been to a few meetings and I just stopped going. So because they were just leading nowhere. So maybe a more proactive role and engagement of civil society, of government with civil society, and see if we can offer at least some recommendations on how to move on. As for the dialogue in general, honestly, as I said, without the EU enlargement and on the table, and without any incentive provided by the US facilitator, I don't see unfortunately, any positive progress in that regard.
Thank you, Donika. Just to extend on just something she said. Just yesterday, I had the chance of reading an op-ed that was written by one of Kurti's formal or informal advisors in relation to people or civil society actors talking about the association. And one of the points that struck me was that neutrality towards ASM by Albanians in Kosovo de facto means that you're a Serbian proponent of threats to sovereignty in Kosovo, and that struck me as something very interesting. Miodrag,
can you share it with us?
Yeah, I definitely will.
Please.
Miodrag.
If I remember correctly, the question was what can you advise the government
exactly
how to move forward? I mean, there should be a structural effort invested by the government to legitimize, understand the genuine interest of the Kosovo Serb, because sometimes they might match what one party is saying, which is very adversary to Kurti from their perspective, that I understand. But it doesn't mean that these interests are not legitimate. And I think there should be a space for Serbs to be heard properly, understand why they're saying this. And for that, I think the Kurti government need to renounce the populism, which is a very difficult, because the populism is what brought them to power. And now what we are seeing is the shift of the Kosovo Kurti government from the very convenient position in opposition, like you can criticize everyone, to the leader of one government that now has to deal with the pressure of external factors. And I don't think that he's dealing very well from this perspective. What is one thing need to be it's a very simple thing about association of Serbian community. Serbs in Kosovo we've been living 20 years after the conflict 1999 without association of Serbian community, and we can still continue to live. So the association is not the key for the survival of the Kosovo Serbs. But institutions, so-called soft parallel institutions like health, education system, social system, are indeed something that is very closely connected to our decision whether to stay or not in Kosovo. If this is ruined, then I think the many Serbs will leave. I mean, we're talking about 12,000 jobs actually to be annulled. So if association is understood as a very efficient mean to utilize to legitimize the soft parallel institution, as they call them in Pristina, then I think the new space will be open to perceive the association of Serbian municipalities as not such a threat, but as actually very efficient tool to overcome this limbo that we are all in.
Thank you very much, Miodrag. On this note, I see no questions from the participants, and I don't want to go on asking questions because I have many more, but there are questions that require additional discussions and many more debates, such as the one organized today. Again, this is the second debate I have had the chance to moderate in the framework of this partnership between NSI and its other partners. I think these discussions are very valuable because we've had the chance to have discussions informally between Kosovo Serbs and Albanians on the issues. There've been Chatham House rules, so kind of we've had unfiltered discussions, but I think it is very necessary to have these in public as well. But to some degree, I also believe that these were kind of unfiltered as well, because we have the opportunity and the freedom to voice our opinions as we wish, especially in Kosovo. We are open to kind of discuss what we truly think and debunk kind of the myths related to the dialogue. In terms of tying everything together, I'm reluctant to do so because, as you might have all been aware and seen throughout the discourse, I think tying the question of ASM all together into one strand of kind of perspectives is very problematic to do because it is very nuanced, but it also features a range of factors that go into it. And as such, I think discussions about ASM should be readily accessible in the public. And therefore, I encourage everyone to kind of access, but also disseminate kind of discussions like this, because it only provides more nuance on the discussions and also moves us away from these kind of monolithic and unchanging perspectives, such as what the current government has had in terms of what Shpatim also said. ASM has been kind of universalized now by ko Zajednica nuk kalon, ose Zajednica kind of threatens the sovereignty of Kosovo. In terms of final remarks for the panel, I would like to thank Miodrag, Donika, but especially Shpatim too, who had to leave us. But I think he had some very insightful points. I would now kind of pass the floor to Dusan for some concluding remarks. But again, thank you so much, Danica, Miodrag, you guys were great, and I hope to be part of future discussions like this with both of you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ardit. I just want to say a few words as a representative of Center for Social Dialogue and Regional Initiatives from Belgrade. To thank to NSI first for this partnership and for the organizing of this series of panels related to the critical points of the process of normalizations. To thank to our panelists and also to all of our participants, because I've seen that for both of the events we had a lot of attendees both on Zoom and on Facebook. That I'm really glad to see that. I just wanted to say that we are implementing this project supported by the Balkan Trust for Democracy, and we are focused on the normalization process, specifically on the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue in Brussels, but also the normalization process between two nations. Therefore, I would like to announce that next week we'll have a final online conference where we will present the new communication platform that we want to propose to the Serbian public, specifically to the Serbian decision makers, Serbian opinion makers and influencers, how to, from a new standpoint, address to the normalization between two nations. We are really eager to present this to Serbian public. We're also going to share this information with the authorities in Serbia and with the opinion makers and influencers, etc. So I would just want to invite you all to be with us on Tuesday, December 28th. Obviously, we're going to share the invitations and you will be invited to join us, to follow our social media also. And I hope to see you next week. And thanks once again for joining us for this occasion.
Ardit, if I may, before we go, let's not address, the issue between the two nations, because apparently Vučić and Rama are really cooperating very well. So the two parties, if you don't want to, if you want to stay neutral to Kosovo status, the parties, the sides or whatever, but two nations, it's rather problematic because we just came out of the open Balkans, which was apparently quite successful. And as Bilica said, like in most of the cases when there was an issue between Kosovo and Serbia, there was, some sort of an avenue through Albania to address some issues. So two nations, probably Rama would be like, okay, because they already are in very, very good relations. But definitely address some issues. And I think, I really hope debate over the need to solve the issue will be revitalized both in Kosovo and in Serbia, because in Serbia it's not even an issue anymore, and in Kosovo it's not a priority. This is
yes, Donika, I would like for you to join us if you can next week, because we are focused on the relations between two nations, Serbs and Albanians, not just Albanians from Kosovo, because we've done a lot of surveys, a lot of opinion polls in Serbia in the last couple of years, and the ethnic distance is huge between from the side of Serbs, obviously, toward Albanians. So we would like to address this much larger and much more important issue. We think is for the future of the regional relations and the stability. That's why we are. But please join us if you can, and then you will see all our arguments, and we can also discuss this.
Well, I will do my best. I will be off next week, and I will have the will to Zoom.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm.
Hi, Ardit.
I was just looking. I just saw that there was a question here.
There was. Okay.
Okay. One second. I'm not sure what
No, there was a question. Yes.
It's about Trump mug.
I live in London, and my Airbnb host, she just said, like, every time you want to yell at someone, just hold this mug.
Actually,
you can be nice and polite, like like proper English lady, but you can still scream at them.
Actually, there seemed to not be a question, just a comment in terms of also our concluding remarks about how we should share perspective and experiences as well. So again, thank you for the remark. And Milos, if there are any remarks from your side, from
No.
NSI.
On behalf of the NSI, I would like to thank you, the panelists. Thank you for joining us. It was a really interesting discussion, and together with our partners from Belgrade, we'll continue organizing these events because we believe and we are quite confident that this type of events will bring a new perspective to the table so we can offer some new solutions, not only in regard to the political issues, but some issues that are really kind of burden the relations and interactions among people. And the solutions are something that will create a political debate more successful and bring the political solution after the two communities or nations create the everyday solutions for their relations. So we'll continue this, and we are happy that we had a lot of attendees throughout these discussions. And I wish all of you Happy New Year's and Happy Holidays, and see you in 2022.
Thank you very much. Have a great one. See you guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You, bye.